This edition of the Bio Report is brought to you by the California Technology Council, providing discounts on products and services essential to every startup. For more information, visit californiatechnology.org/member benefits. I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. One of the issues researchers face is getting access to needed biospecimens with detailed clinical data that can expand the understanding of a specific disease or treatment. The difficulty in obtaining biospecimens can hamper R&D productivity, extend the time of a project, and increase cost. Novaseek has developed a platform that provides access to real-world data and supports the ability to define patient cohorts based on detailed clinical criteria, such as demographics, diagnoses, medications, and lab test results, and supports the collection of biospecimens at various time points. The platform also offers healthcare organizations an opportunity to develop a new source of revenue. We spoke to Kate Torchilin, CEO of Novaseek, about the challenges researchers face in getting biospecimens, how Novaseek seeks to address that, and how the company's platform can help to accelerate biomedical research. Kate, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
We're going to talk about Novaseek and the problem it's trying to address through its clinical data network for research platform. Let's start with the issues researchers face today to get access to biospecimens and clinical data. How much of a barrier is this to getting research performed in a timely manner, and what makes this difficult?
So, no, thank you. It's a very good question. And I think at the even high level, I think one of the biggest unmet needs and what drives really a lot of inefficiencies in current research and development process is the lack of patient-centric approaches, right? And the lack of really kind of common language or common capabilities for researchers all the way from discovery in the lab through clinical trials and on to new therapies actually going onto the market, to have common and profound understanding of real-world patients. And kind of that need manifests itself on many different levels, including a lot in just, ability to understand the patient and get access to, clinical data that are real-world data and reflecting the true patient, and also get access to, biological specimens from patients that are reflecting as closely as possible the disease or clinical condition that you as a researcher are actually studying. So I think that's kind of the overarching need is just to get that access. And what made it historically and still to a large extent very difficult is that there is just no easy way to get that understanding and to get that access to real-world patient data, and then from there, to patients and biological specimens from those patients.
We're seeing a rapid proliferation of genetic data available today, but by itself, that has its limits. How much of a challenge is it for researchers to connect genotype to phenotype, and why does that matter?
No, that's another very good question. And obviously there is, huge proliferation of omics research in general, right? There is proteomics and metabolomics and genomics, especially, but all of them ultimately, all of those types of research rely on extremely, extremely detailed biological investigation of a patient or biological specimen from the patient. And so you end up literally with terabytes of data after you complete that biological part of the experiment. And where kind of another huge inefficiency of nowadays research lies is that then the researcher who has now this terabyte of genomics data, starts thinking, okay, what does it really reflect in terms of the status of the disease in the patient? And often only to discover that the clinical information that they have on that biological specimen that they just studied is actually very limited, right? So you have terabytes of genomics data on one end, and then maybe you know that patient has diabetes, right, on the other end, but you really don't know the stage of the disease or how the patient was treated. And that mismatch, I think, really creates a lot of inefficiencies and makes it so hard to discover new and validate meaningful either diagnostics or therapeutics for a variety of conditions. And so that is, overarchingly what we're trying to address, because we believe that everything that happens in the research lab or in a clinical trial should be as clinically significant as possible. And so we believe by providing more detail and more color around the real world clinical data, in addition to genomics data, will make the whole research enterprise more meaningful.
As a society, we've tried to be very protective of medical privacy. I think it's becoming clear, particularly as we enter this era of big data and electronic medical health records, that we're failing to capitalize on the vast amounts of data we have in health records to improve our understanding of disease and accelerate the development of new therapies, as well as better evaluate the safety and efficacy of existing medications and prevention strategies. Before we discuss what Novaseek is specifically doing, do you think privacy concerns have impeded the use of valuable data, and do we need to rethink medical privacy in this context?
Yeah, so that is obviously hugely important ethical consideration, and we actually believe that addressing privacy concerns of the patients and conducting really top-notch research are not mutually exclusive and never should be. And patients' privacy should take really, really big priority. And so, in our minds, there are probably three very important components of addressing how the patient and clinical information is being addressed and engaged and into the research process. And first, in our minds, it's very important to educate patients and healthy individuals about the type of research that's being done and the importance and what it means for them individually to be participating or not participating. So education is one very important component. Second one is obviously complete, informed consent of the patient, right? So again, any individual should be making very well educated decision if they want to participate in research-related activities or they don't want to participate in research-related activities. So consent is a second very important component. And then third, ultimately for individuals that express the interest to participate, the respect to the privacy and security of the data should be obviously, one of the primary concerns of researchers on the other end. So again, the three kind of pronged approach that we think should be followed and that we're following as a company with everything that we do. First, patient education. Second, informed consent. Third, respect to privacy and security. And that's where really the technology, the way it's been developing, not just in medical field, but in general in our society with is really kind of a tide that's lifting all boats. Because right now there is a lot of precedent and there are a lot of very secure and highly automated technologies that exist out there and now can be applied to how we collect and process and organize and store and use medical information as well. for research purposes.
Well, let's talk about Novaseek. Give me a little background about the company. When was it founded? What's it seeking to do, and how does it fit into this greater issue we've been discussing?
Yeah, no, thank you. So with Novaseek, I think we kind of really saw the need, and my own kind of personal professional background is all in the life sciences research, both working in academic institutions as well as in companies that are developing new diagnostic tests and developing better methods of doing research. And really observing the needs and bottlenecks in this process that many times came back to the issue that we discussed earlier about really the need of understanding the real world patients, right? From the moment you still looking at the tube with like cells in them, and then you kind of graduate to mouse, and then ultimately from a mouse into a human clinical trial, and then onto a therapy that actually goes now into the doctors and patients' hands, really understanding the patient throughout that continuum. We saw a lot of bottlenecks there. And then looking at the other side of where the patients currently are, right, and where they kind of interact right now with healthcare system inside the hospital, and realizing that there is a lot of information there and a lot of really good work and interaction with patients that happens there. And then the question, how now then do you match the two so that you can really utilize without creating any inconvenience for the patient or for the hospital, but how can you start leveraging what happens in those healthcare settings to address some of the bottlenecks on the life sciences research side? And so that's really what drove us to kind of contemplate our clinical data network for research and the ways to really enable that automated way to access patient biological specimens and associated clinical data to facilitate research.
Well, can you explain what the clinical data network for research is and how it works?
Yes, absolutely. So at a very high level, it is a really way to apply the latest and greatest in health IT technology to solving life sciences tasks. And so there is a lot of technology and logistics that makes that platform work. And I'll describe how it works in a second. But ultimately, we're trying to achieve three main goals, right? So we're trying for the researcher who is contemplating clinical studies or discovery work inside the lab, right? To give that person extremely easy to understand and intuitive to navigate access to clinical information that's going to facilitate, the planning and increase clinical significance of research. On the other hand, we're trying for the hospitals and the patients to give them extremely easy ways with full respect to privacy and consent and without interfering with the general course of patients receiving care to actually share biological specimens and data for research purpose. So that's at the high level what the platform is trying to achieve, give the easy and understandable information to the researcher, and then really give a very easy and enabling way for patients and hospitals, for consenting patients and hospitals to share that. The underlying kind of ins and outs of how the platform actually works, we interface with some of the existing clinical data sources inside the hospitals, and clinical information inside the hospitals resides within laboratory information system, within electronic health records, within some other pockets of information inside the hospitals. And then when patients are consenting to participate in Novaseek programs, right, certain types of clinical information is then shared with Novaseek, and then with the researcher who is requesting a variety of biological specimens, for example, from patients with diabetes or for patients with certain cardiovascular conditions. And so that's at the very kind of high level how the whole platform.
So when you get a biological sample, there is some kind of a medical history attached to it?
Yeah, so from the researcher or clinical researcher standpoint, the value of this access to really real world information comes at 2 points. So first, when they're just planning the experiment and they're really trying to understand or need to understand what types of patients are even out there, right? So if I'm contemplating a research for an early predictor of type 2 diabetes disease and how it's going to progress, I'm trying to understand how many patients might be there who started developing disease based, for example, on HA1C levels within the last year. And, how many of them tend to be males or females, and maybe what are the kind of demographics and things like this, right? So that then I can collect biological specimens to validate my marker for an early diabetes disease from the most relevant patient population. And so at this point, researcher really needs to access to population level analytics, right? How many patients out there who just started having elevated HA1C levels? How many of them are males or females, right? And so this is one area where researchers start interacting with Novaseek and Clinical Data Network for Research, just helping them formulate really meaningful studies. And then very quickly they zero in then on that cohort of patients from whom they would like to receive biological specimens for the studies. And then they, as they receive those specimens, they get from consented patients within our network, each specimen will come with fairly detailed clinical annotation along the lines of what researcher requested, right? So it will be patient demographics, it will be relevant laboratory test results, it will be, relevant diagnosis, right? This patient was diagnosed within the last year, maybe that patient was diagnosed within the last 5 years. Very importantly, researchers only receive coded information on patients, and there is absolutely no way for them to re-identify the patient, but they get enough information, enough real-world data information together with the biological specimen to really enable their study.
And how do you work with researchers? Is this through a subscription-based model? Do they come to you and request specific types of data they're looking for?
Yeah, so I think it's the very first the very first thing that we really now educating the researchers on is about how the first importance I think is broadly recognized. Researchers know that they need access to more real-world data so that they can plan that experiment, right? Historically, there was just no easy way for them to get that information. So we're educating them about such tools now being available through Clinical Data Network for research that Novaseek offers, so that they can start looking at this population level analytics and then request specific specimens or formulate cohorts of patients that they would like to follow, for example, and keep collecting maybe biological specimens as HA1C level increase and diabetes kind of progresses in certain patient groups. And so then they continuously receive also then biological specimens from those cohorts of patients.
How much ability do researchers have in terms of defining a desired cohort?
So they probably have compared to historically what has been available to them when they're trying to define what exactly they're looking for. I think really what clinical data network for research offers is a tremendous improvement and significant leap forward, right? So researchers can really formulate the request based on patient demographics, variety of problems such as different diseases as well as comorbidities, right? So, for example, if somebody is looking for diabetes as accompanied by certain heart conditions or elevated high blood pressure, what's not, medications that might or might have not been prescribed to a patient, historical lab test results such as HA1C kind of trends. And so that's really fairly detailed information, right, about the disease profile that they can be requesting. And another very important thing to note here that in addition to those kind of fairly detailed profiles that they request, there is immediate feedback kind of mechanism that's built into the CDNR platform that if researcher submits a request, for example, for patients with Crohn's disease, right, if historically that request would travel all the way to the doctor or laboratory inside the hospital and saying, well, there is a research project and people are looking for Crohn's disease patients. The reality of medical practice is that patients are not recognized as having Crohn's disease. There are about 8 different subtypes of Crohn's disease that the doctor will be categorizing the patient into one of those kind of 8 Crohn's subtype buckets. So now, if that information then doesn't go back to the research and say, well, there are 8 subtypes, which one do you really want to study? Or maybe all of them, or maybe you don't care, right? So if that question is not being asked, and in fact, researcher really wanted just one subtype because of the type of marker that they're studying, for example, then there will be a lot of really research that will be done and ultimately not resulting in a very good, markers being discovered. So with our platform, we're really enabling researchers to go to that level of detail and give them immediate feedback. You just ask for Crohn's disease, which subtype, and tell us, and then they can immediately refine, right, again, the request. So it goes to that level of really detail and get all ultimately with the goal to educate research community about real-world patients as much as possible.
Well, where in the research continuum do you see this having the greatest value? Where do you think it has the greatest opportunity for providing insights?
So I think of my perfect and visionary answer is that at every single step of the research process, people should be inside the research and development enterprise should be utilizing common platform and being on the same page about the real world patient. Starting again from very early in the discovery when you're just now thinking of how the whole discovery program will look like, and all the way to actually launching new therapy on the market. And the more there is commonality in people really inside R&D thinking of the real-world patients in the same terms, the more efficient the whole flow of the development will go. But I think we're ultimately quite long ways away from that. CDNR is the first step towards that, to enable people to have the same platform and start speaking the same language. But there is much work needs to be done. So the most use that we see now in the areas where people transitioning from one type of study to another, such as, for example, translational medicine, where researchers start transitioning from the world of cells and mice to the world of actual real human beings being enrolled in clinical trials. So then at this point, they really now need to revalidate the discoveries and hypotheses from the lab to kind of the bedside. So this is one area that is very important. And then assessing feasibility of clinical trial protocols, if, again, for the development of a new molecule, a new therapeutic, there is a concept that you need to enroll 400 patients with certain clinical profiles. You need to start assessing, right, how many of those patients are actually out there and how do you optimize your cohort. And then also when ultimately the new therapy is on the market and patients begin to use it outside of the context of a clinical trial, how do you now continuously, without interfering with clinical practice and without creating a lot of burden for the patients and for the doctors, how can you continuously monitor, right, for any side effects or any additional positive effects from your new therapy? And that's, again, another area where you need, as a researcher, continuous access to real-world data and biological specimens from such patients. So it's mostly right now translational medicine, early clinical feasibility, and post-launch observational studies.
And how do you see your platform growing and changing in the way researchers work?
Our ultimate vision is of a world where that clear understanding of real-world patients is really central to every stage of life sciences research and development. And with everything that we are doing and will continue to do, we're really trying to transform how scientists and clinical researchers access and interact with real-world clinical data and try to accelerate medical advance through speedy drug development for more targeted populations.
Kate Torchilin, CEO of Novaseek. Kate, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.